In June 2020, when a group of friends set off on a walk to follow some randomised coordinates, they had no idea that this exploration would lead them to a mysteriously abandoned suitcase. After getting their phones out to record the experience on TikTok, these teenagers approached the strange dark box. It was only then that they noted an awful smell coming from within, and after opening the lid, they realized that what they were dealing with was something very, very sinister. Authorities would eventually confirm that inside this mysterious suitcase were the decaying remains of a body, and the teens' spontaneous adventure was just the beginning of piecing together a very disturbing story. But who was the victim, or indeed victims of this tragedy? How did they end up here, discarded in the bag, and who was to blame? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the very disturbing case of the TikTok Suitcase Murders. Now, you may very well have seen the viral video found within this case. However, do you know the whole story? But before we begin, and just to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if that is your sort of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. Right, and now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of the TikTok Suitcase Murders. To begin with, this story takes us back to the city I was born. And so, without any hesitation, welcome to Seattle, Washington, folks. Found right up in the northwestern corner of the United States, Seattle is a seaport city with a staggeringly large number of things to do. Initially inhabited by a handful of federally recognized tribes for the last several thousand years, Seattle was founded in 1851 before being incorporated as a city in 1869. It saw several boom and bust cycles over the years, including the Great Timber Era, Gold Rush, the shipbuilding boom during the First World War, and then the Great Depression. But nowadays, Seattle's economy is absolutely thriving, to say the least. And although it's primarily built on the lumber trade, other industries such as international transport, IT, and clean technology are all on the rise. With a city population of 740,000 residents and a metro area population of just over 4 million, it is very easy to get lost amongst the crowds here. Moving west of Seattle's heart, we find one of its oldest neighborhoods, which is known as North Admiral. It offers superior views of the city's skyline, and in addition to this, its neighboring suburb Alki provides a great walk along the coastline of Puget Sound. Start your walk on Alki Beach for a spot of volleyball, hop across the road to grab a coffee, and then head north along Alki Avenue to gaze over Elliott Bay. After about half an hour of walking, you'll find yourself at Alki Beach Pier. And let me tell you, this place is guaranteed to provide incredible views and sights. This is true for at least the majority of the time, but on June 19th, 2020, this statement couldn't be any further from reality. On this day, a group of teenagers came across a highly unpleasant sight, and it all began with a game and a few videos on TikTok. During this time, the teens were playing Randonautica, an app available on Android and iPhone which randomly generates coordinates that enables users to explore the local area and report their findings. It's worth mentioning here that the coordinates given are entirely random and possess no logic or premeditated planning. However, the app does have a reputation for leading players to highly disturbing places, and this story unfortunately supports that theory. Randonautica instructed them to go to coordinates 47.59535 north and 122.38738 west. This led them to the eastern side of Alki Beach Pier, and when they arrived, they spotted a suspicious black suitcase lying on the rocks below them. The TikTok video starts innocently enough. The group were mildly surprised to see it down there, and unsurprisingly, as with anyone with a hint of curiosity, they headed down to take a look, even joking that perhaps it might contain money. But the suitcase smelled awful, and as they approached it, the powerful smell became unbearable, and this was when the jovial atmosphere abruptly jolted to one of sinister shock, as upon opening the lid, they realized it was filled with something wrapped in a bin bag. Rather than get themselves involved in something they didn't want to be a part of, the group cleverly decided to call the authorities to check it out. And once they arrived, the place was immediately cordoned off as a crime scene. Now, the kids did have their suspicions, and sadly, they were proven to be correct, because found inside the suitcase were the partial remains of a human body. It is worth mentioning that Alki Beach is a very popular and busy place to be, So to find something like this left out in the open around so many people is alarming. Yet what was even more strange was how the landlord crap had led them to that place the exact moment it had a body. Come to think of it, the chances of that happening truly were astronomical. After cordoning off the crime scene, police officers asked the teenagers and all other members of the public to leave the area. At first, no one knew what they were dealing with, but as the hours passed, they would find several other bags in the area, with most of them being in the water. And, furthermore, there was more than just one body.
Gruesome investigation tonight along Alki Beach in West Seattle. Police find several bags containing human body parts near the water. KOMO's Joel Moreno live tonight along Alki Avenue. Joel, the discovery has shocked the neighborhood that's often packed with people.
Neighbors don't know what to make of this, Preston. They do call it chilling. Police, they had this whole area blocked off for most of the evening, and we watched as officers carried large plastic bags over to a tent where they could process that evidence without crowds of people looking on.
It was noted that detectives were investigating several bags containing human remains. They were located near the 1100 block of Alki Avenue Southwest, which was just east of where the teenagers found the suitcase. They eventually established that there were 2 bodies in total, and gruesomely, they'd been dismembered and placed into multiple bags before being tossed into the water. At first, no one knew who these victims could be. It became evident that they were likely dealing with a man and a woman, but otherwise, the authorities had no clue. But 11 days later, after passing the remains to the King County Medical Examiner's office, both of these bodies were finally positively identified. And tragically, they would have to let the families of 27-year-old Austin Wenner and 36-year-old Jessica Lewis know that they had died. Autopsy reports determined that both of them had been beaten and shot to death before being dismembered. Austin had been shot a total of 7 times, whereas Jessica was shot once. The estimated date of their deaths was June the 9th, 2020, which was 10 days before their remains were found. This was ruled as the date of their death thanks to the help of technology, with detectives obtaining their phone records and learning that their phones had stopped transmitting or receiving data on June the 9th. At approximately 7:08 p.m. Jessica and Austin were partners and had been together for over 8 years, a clear testament to the fond love the pair shared for each other. Understandably, their families were mortified when they learned that the two had been murdered. And as most of these murder cases go, it was entirely out of the blue. Nobody had a chance to say goodbye, and this revelation would be the toughest for their 4 children. Jessica Lewis was 36 years old at the time of her death, and although her 4 children were from a previous relationship, she was happy with Austin. She was described as a caring person who worked with disabled adults. Jessica was also known to be a ray of sunshine and a very attentive and loving person. Going by the name of Cash Money online, Austin was born and raised in Kent, Washington, and he attended White River High School, though not much is known about his job. The man was described as someone who had faith, a big heart, and found enjoyment in many things, including the outdoors, country music, campfires, trucks, dogs, Jessica, and his family. And although Austin was 9 years her junior, he stepped up to the plate to look after her 4 children with her. This was in addition to his own child, who was also from a previous relationship about 1 year prior. The two met and fell in love in 2012, and their friends and family all described them as a strong and happy couple that, despite all difficulties, were able to deal with whatever came their way. Now, in addition to the autopsy report and their phone records, detectives were making good progress in other areas of the investigation. They soon learned through interviews of family and friends that the 2 victims were last seen at their home, which was located at 16466 Ambound Boulevard South in Burien, Washington. It turns out that Ambound Boulevard was not too far from the area their bodies were found, so it checked out with the officers. Found around 11 miles south, it's located just off the 509 highway and west of Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Anyone here remember Sky King? And this is where they learned something very peculiar. Like many of our generation, Jessica and Lewis could not afford a home of their own yet, and since the two were unfortunately not able to rent their own home, they instead lived in a rented room of their landlord's house. And this house belonged to a 63-year-old man named Michael Lee Dudley. Now, from the outset, detectives were not confident that Michael had nothing to do with their deaths. After rechecking Austin's and Jessica's phone records, they noticed that a phone call had been made to another phone at 7:01 p.m, which was just 7 minutes before both of their phones were switched off forever. And of course, if you've connected the dots already, this number belonged to no one other than Michael. Now, this wasn't the only thing learned during their investigations, because as it turns out, a phone call had been made to 911 the very same night. After hearing a man scream, "Please don't do this, just let me leave," neighbours reportedly heard multiple gunshots coming from inside the Dudley residence. But when officers arrived to inspect the property, all the lights were out and no one appeared to be home. And believe it or not, they left the premises with no further action. However, when one of Michael's new tenants arrived at the property just 1 hour later, not only were the lights back on, but Michael was even there to greet her at the door. Peering into one of the rooms, she recalled seeing the outline of a person under a pile of clothes. The arm appeared to be bloody, and there was no movement coming from him. When she asked him what had happened, Michael responded with, "My gun worked and his didn't. Now please move along, I have a mess to clean up." Now, it's not known why she took so long to tell officers what she had discovered. I mean, we all respond to shock in a variety of ways. But something of this magnitude, I mean, come on, really? Regardless, if these allegations were true, it would be almost impossible to deny that Michael was involved in Jessica's and Austin's deaths. Based on the information discovered by and provided to authorities, they decided to process a search warrant for Michael Dudley's residence. And on the 19th of August 2020, this warrant was formally served alongside his arrest. To begin with, the general public was surprised to see Michael in handcuffs, as, to be honest with you, he just didn't seem the type. You would probably make the same assumption here as they did, given that the man had a very soft and friendly face. In fact, he appeared to have a pretty solid reputation amongst the local community too. So much so that his lawyer was able to obtain 11 letters attesting to his seemingly good character. These letters noted that he had taken people in during their time of need. He also helped people when no one else would, and even flew to California to help out small communities during the wildfires. But other items of evidence firmly contradicted these claims, and in fact, the evidence was stacked so high against him that he would even be denied bond while investigators built a case against him. And rightfully so, as behind the supposedly soft man's gentle and kind facade were a few very dark and terrible secrets, ones that would turn any saint into a monster. So where do I begin? For lack of a better phrase, this man really is a sack of shit. Let's start with the smaller of his list of charges. Michael had a criminal history dating as far back as the 90s. These crimes included grand theft auto, or in other words, stealing cars. But moving forward, he would go into much heavier offences. This included trafficking, possession of drugs, and then even worse. Dating back just 2 years before Austin's and Jessica's deaths, a restraining order was filed against him, and this order was from no one other than his very own daughter. The documents highlighted state that Michael had sexually assaulted her for a period of 9 years, from the age of 10 through to 18. This included being drugged, sexually assaulted, and even forced to share a bed with him. He would even threaten her with a firearm should she tell anyone or step out of line. Michael's daughter went on to say that she never felt safe in her own home, or even in the general public, leaving her with a mountain of psychological trauma. Now, regrettably, the court ultimately denied the order because, quote, "These allegations did not meet the definitions of sexual assault and fall under domestic violence." Now, honestly, it is insane to me to think that such a serious offence was theoretically thrown out the window due to not meeting legal definitions. Bureaucratic bullshit, if you ask me. Either way, the order and all other allegations were never looked at again, and just like that, Michael was allowed to walk free. His dark and hidden secrets did not stop there, however. Back in 2016, he was arrested and charged with assault after beating up his ex-girlfriend, all while holding a gun. Now, Jessica was very close to her aunt and had shared many concerning stories about her landlord, Michael. With a very comfortable plot of land, he owned several chickens in the backyard. It is alleged that after one of his dogs got to one of his chickens, he beat the dog to death with a hammer. And all of this happened right in front of Jessica and Austin, who watched on in horror. The two seemed to be terrified of the man at times. But in addition to this, they struggled to afford rent, which, by the way, was $1,500 per month. It is thought that this act of aggression from Michael could have been an intimidation tactic to make the couple cough up the cash on time. Apparently, he had even broken into their car on multiple occasions, left trackers on other people's vehicles, and even pointed a gun at an electrician after the two had an argument. Jessica's aunt knew that both of them were in a very tough situation, down on their luck without a strong paycheck, and in the middle of a very scary time with COVID-19 ripping through America. Although letters attested that Michael helped people in need, it seems to me that he was doing quite the opposite. I mean, $1,500 a month for a single room sounds like absolute madness. Others who have had negative experiences with Michael recall him as a man with an affluent family and close ties to California. Not only that, but he told many of them his desire to kill his neighbors and other people. After their deaths, and while Jessica and Austin remained silent, Austin's father went to Michael's home to ask him where they were. That is when Michael told him that they had recently moved out, but of course, Austin's father didn't buy this. To make things worse, he noticed a pile of clothes draping from the garbage bin, and upon further inspection, he recognized some of the clothing to be his son's. He also knew that both Jessica and Austin were struggling with money, so for them to just run away and leave all possessions behind made absolutely no sense at all. Following Michael's arrest, and when crime scene investigators searched the property, they found bullet holes, bullet strikes, spent rounds from a 9mm pistol, and blood in the same room that the woman claimed to see a hand emerging from the pile of clothes. Furthermore, that same room's wall had been painted in the weeks prior, and the smell of bleach emanated from the floor. Through both of these actions, it became evident that much effort had been made to refurbishing it. On the very night of his arrest, he was interviewed by detectives. Michael had claimed that Jessica and Austin had stayed with him during the quarantine period, and that no one else had stayed with them over that time frame. He went on to admit that the room they had rented from him was, in fact, the very same room that was recently painted and cleaned. Apparently, they were not able to afford the rent that month. He further admitted that this led to arguments between them, but fell short of any actions or consequences. When asked about the blood found in their room, he told detectives that Jessica had cut herself in the weeks prior, but he couldn't explain the bullet holes or bullets, and on that basis was kept in custody. The legal proceedings to this case remained under the radar right up until his trial, and in fact, I'd been keeping a close eye on this for about 2 years, with almost no information given to the public. The trial was rescheduled 3 times for unknown reasons, but in October 2022, it finally began. By the way, it was noted that Michael's well-off family had already tried to sell his house just 4 months after the murders, without any citation of the horrors that unfolded before. Several witnesses came to the stand, including the woman who briefly moved into Michael's house on the night that Jessica and Austin were killed. During his trial, she testified that he had scratches and broken eyeglasses after the altercation. The woman also saw several guns in the bathroom sink and witnessed apparent bullet strikes to furniture in the same bedroom. Officers discovered 2 bullet holes in the same location. One of them had been patched with plumber's putty and painted over, and a can of the same plumber's putty was later located in Michael's bedroom. Now, phone records showed that his mobile phone pinged off a tower near West Seattle's Alki Beach late on June 18th, 2020. Out of 3 months' worth of obtained data, this was the only time it did so, and the very next afternoon, our group of teenagers found the suitcase. But Michael's defense put up an intense fight against the prosecution. They argued that the data presented to the jury was unreliable and cherry-picked by the prosecution. Furthermore, they claimed it was next to impossible to determine a person's location based on mobile phone pings. They also highlighted that an attic-to-basement search of Michael's house by blood experts didn't turn up any compelling evidence, and other than a smudge of Austin's blood, no more was found. To demonstrate this, the defense presented 2.5 2-liter bottles of Diet Coca-Cola, representing 5 liters, which is the average volume of blood found in the human body. Compare that to a teaspoon of blood found by the blood experts, and you've got a very different story. They also highlighted that no blood was found in Michael's vehicle, and that firearms experts also agreed that the 3 bullets found in their bedroom did not go through a human body. But the prosecution maintained a very compelling story, and with the assistance of his criminal history, mobile phone data from Michael, Jessica, and Austin, witnesses and testimonies, and his answers given in his own interrogation, Michael had nowhere to run. The jury would only take 1.5 days to come back with their verdict. And finally, on December 8th, 2022, after a 2-month-long trial, Michael Lee Dudley was found guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder. In addition to this, the jury also concluded that he was armed with a firearm when he killed them, which automatically adds 10 years to his prison term. It was determined determined that Jessica and Austin were unable to afford their rent for the next month of their tenancy. This resulted in a dispute between the couple and their landlord, sending Michael into a fit of rage. He murdered both of them in cold blood, dismembered their bodies, and then disposed of their remains in Puget Sound. But fate would pull their bodies back to shore, and in an even greater stroke of luck, the randomised coordinates of an exploration app would bring a group of TikTok-using teenagers to the evidence. Their videos would bring all eyes to the story, which ultimately led to all eyes on Michael Lee Dudley, a man who is now infamously known as a murderer, an abuser, a thief, and allegedly an animal killer. Michael's sentencing is set for March the 10th, 2023, and it is very likely that he will receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. To be honest with you, for all I care, I hope they chuck him behind bars and throw the key away. But let's face it, with a verdict like this, and at the age of 68, his life is pretty much over. Austin's and Jessica's families welcomed the verdict, and now with Michael behind bars, they hope that they can now move forward with their lives. No doubt they will live on in their memories. Jessica's family remember her as a beautiful ray of sunshine, whereas Austin's family remember him as a man with a big heart. Both of them were struggling to financially keep afloat in a year so troubling and devastating for many of us. And it's a real tragedy that they unknowingly found their way into the home of a violent monster. You know, I'm not one to believe in superstition, but I have to admit it's very weird that a random app with random coordinates led teenagers to a body on the very day it was there. The chances of that happening are extraordinarily low, so you have to ask yourself, was this a stroke of pure luck? Or was something more mysterious at play here? I'll leave that one for you to decide, and as for me, I'm going to wrap this case up here today, folks. Thank you so much for being here for another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or insightful, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. And of course, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Remember that life is full of mystery, and every day there is a lesson to be learned. For me, the lesson learned is don't do leg day the day before you stand up for 2 hours and record a video, because quite honestly, I just want to sit down now. For Michael, the lesson learned back in June 2020 was very, very different. Don't dump bodies in Puget Sound, you idiot. In fact, don't kill anybody at all. I think that's probably the main lesson learned here. Anyway, that is all from me today, folks. So again, thank you so much for being here. And as always, I'll be back again very soon for another video. But until we see each other again, please remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.